Today we're going to be talking about Social Security, different benefit types, maximizing your payment amount, rules regarding taxation, claiming. We got a bunch of good stuff in store for you guys, so we thank you for joining. To just kick it off, we're going to go into some housekeeping items before we get into the nuts and bolts of the presentation. So first, the time frame. So we expect this to be about an hour and 15 minutes, so we appreciate you sticking with us the whole time. Following the presentation will be a survey. We really value your feedback, so definitely worth your while to stay through the whole presentation. There's a lot of different good topics that Jim and I cover throughout the presentation, so expect around an hour to an hour 15 minutes in total. You're more than welcome to put your questions in the chat box. Given the complexity of this topic and the fact that most of the time the answers to your questions may be customized and individual to your specific situation, it may be difficult for us to answer at the end of the webinar. We'll try to answer as many as possible, but we do encourage and offer a complimentary consultation with Jim or I, where we can kind of address those questions in a more one-on-one personal opportunity. And then from there, I mentioned we have a survey that will be distributed at the end of the webinar. Once you close out, it should take you 5 minutes or less to complete. I think that's all the housekeeping items. Okay, the last one would be recording. So I know the question comes up from time to time, are we going to get access to this presentation? Yes, you will. Tomorrow we'll send an email that has a link to view the presentation. It's going to be a YouTube link. You're more than welcome to share it with anyone you think would benefit from the material covered. So you'll be able to find it there. It'll also be visible on our website. So yes, this webinar will be recorded and you will be able to access it tomorrow. So let's get straight into the presenters. Introduce Jim Allen first. Jim is the older one, as you may be able to tell, the more experienced one of the two. He's the Director of Financial Planning and Firm Principal here at Anchor Bay Capital. He's been in the industry for over 30 years, so has extensive experience helping clients navigate through not only Social Security, but the whole comprehensive financial planning process. He's recognized by the Certified Financial Planner Board as a Certified Financial Planner. If you're not familiar with that designation, you need to pass a rigorous examination, be in the industry for at least 3 years, have a minimum education requirement, so you take a bunch of different courses related to financial planning, essentially the gold standard related to financial planning. He also holds a Chartered Financial Consultant designation. He's an enrolled agent with the IRS, so he's admitted to prepare tax returns and represent those in front of the IRS if they were ever to run into trouble. He also has a master's degree in science in financial planning and taxation, and he's the co-author of a charitable planning book. So he has a lot of credentials under his belt. In terms of myself, my name is Blake Pinion. I am a candidate for CFP certification. So what does that mean? I passed the rigorous 170 question exam back in November 2019. In a few months, I'll be recognized as a certified financial planner. I'm an aspiring enrolled agent, so I'm looking to pass that exam and be recognized with that credential. From there, I'm a graduate from San Diego State University with a degree in financial services and a minor in communications. So both of us primarily focus on helping clients in the area of financial planning and tax, and we both have a passion for it. Next slide. So a little background about us here at Anchor Bay. We're independent registered investment advisory financial planning firm established in 1992. We focus on your total financial life, including your taxes. So we not only delve into the area of Social Security, but we're going to look at your insurance, your estate plan, your tax return, your retirement income plan, your investments. Every area of your financial life, we want to stick our nose into it because we believe everything works in conjunction with one another. So we take our clients through a whole comprehensive financial planning process to do so. The investments are the tool, but the plan kind of helps get the tool to work, if you will. So collectively, we have over 100 years of combined financial planning and investment experience. Our roots are in investment management, but we're increasing our presence in the area of financial planning. So we not only have analysts who do due diligence on stocks and different ways to help our clients build a sustainable portfolio, but we also have a lot of financial planning expertise, as you saw from the previous slide. We're always going to act as a fiduciary, and what does that mean? We're acting in your best interest 115% of the time. It's always going to be advice that aligns with your values and your overall goals, always in your best interest, your needs first. You know, we embody a nautical theme here, so we'll help you kind of make sure the wind's blowing you in the right direction and make sure there's life preservers on the boat. But you tell us a destination and we'll help out. We'll help chart the course for that. So you pay us for advice and wisdom, not the products. And then we have offices locally in Carlsbad and Tustin. So we're going to provide that advice you need in the manner you desire. Next slide. Okay, so we have a poll question to lead off the content here. So we just wanted to ask the crowd here, have you claimed your Social Security yet? So Jim will launch the poll here, and there's multiple answers available. So the first one would be, yes, I'm receiving mine. No, when I don't know the best time to claim. No, not until I turn 62, which is the earliest I can claim. So this would be the idea that you already have that preconceived notion you want to claim at 62. Not until you reach your full retirement age 70, or you're not eligible for Social Security benefits, which Jim will talk about later. Some people may not be eligible if they didn't pay into Social Security via some types of provisions, such as the government pension offset or the windfall elimination provision. So after you respond, Jim will launch those results.
And we'll just give it another few seconds here. We'll get, like most people have responded.
Okay, beautiful. So it looks like a little over a third of us don't know the best time to claim. So you're definitely in the right place here. Jim's gonna highlight that throughout this presentation is the different strategies that help you understand what's the best time to claim, or rather get you familiar with some of the considerations you should have in place when determining that decision. So that's good to hear that most of us are looking to learn more, and then some of us not until my retirement age or not until I turn 70. Great. Okay, so you can go ahead and close that poll. So I'm going to transition the conversation to Jim, who's going to talk about our first topic for expectations for tonight.
All right, thanks, Blake. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. So you may have attended presentations like this before, and typically in the past we've always done these in person. We typically would do them at a community center here in Orange County or down in the Carlsbad area at a library or community center, senior center, whatever. Unfortunately, with the current COVID pandemic, we're kind of limited to doing these online. We hope to get back to doing these in person in the future. But one of the first things I say when we do these in person is, don't worry, we're not going to lock the door, and you're going to be subjected to a timeshare type of sales pitch. We absolutely promise that everything we're going to talk about tonight is strictly educational. We're not going to mention products, A, because we don't sell products, and B, because we want this to be solely educational. So I'm probably going to tell you more about Social Security than you ever cared to know, but it is a very important topic when it comes to your retirement. And then we're going to kind of frame the whole Social Security discussion around how do you maximize your retirement income. That's really what matters, is making sure that you don't run out of money in retirement. And if you make smart decisions about your Social Security, that certainly will go a long way towards helping that. So the topics tonight, I'm going to cover the basics of Social Security, how you get Social Security, how they determine your benefits, how claiming at certain ages affect your benefits. We're going to talk about the fine print. things that you may not know about, like your benefits can be withheld if you take them early and work, or how they're taxed, or what happens if you get divorced, all of that kind of stuff. But as I mentioned, we're going to kind of frame this within the overall retirement picture and where Social Security fits in. And so we're going to kind of start with just a generic discussion about retirement in general, and then that'll lead us into the detailed discussion about Social Security. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes is Social Security under the current rules. And it's one of the questions we get all the time. We had it last night when we had a client meeting is, well, what happens if Social Security goes away? And so the rules I'm going to talk about are the rules as they are today. And they very well could change in the future. I mean, one of the answers I typically give to our clients is, if you're of the baby boomer generation and you're nearing retirement or in retirement, they're not going to change the rules on you. A, it's a very large voting block, but B, they know that people are relying on Social Security and it's an important benefit. And so they're not likely to change the rules on us. Have they changed the rules in the past? Yeah. Originally, the filing age was 65, and now it's 66 to 67, depending on when you were born. And they very well likely change it for our kids and grandkids. Just a year or so ago, there was legislation called SOS, or Save Our Social Security, where they talked about changing the future full retirement age from the current 66 to 67 to age 70, because people are living longer. And I'll show you how Social Security is designed in a few slides. But I think if you're in that baby boomer range, you're in your 50s into your 60s, I think you can be pretty confident that they're not going to change the rules on you. And so we're going to talk about what those rules are today and how you can maximize what you're going to get from Social Security. So I start with these numbers, and this isn't a lottery ticket, but these are some numbers related to Social Security. And as we go through this presentation, you're going to see that Social Security is a very important and meaningful benefit, which leads us to the first number here, 40. So there was a survey done by, I believe it was ARP, that determined that for the average American, about 40% of the retirement income is going to come from Social Security. So almost half of your income during retirement is going to come from Social Security. So it's a meaningful benefit. The other number there, 111,000, I'm going to show you some examples about how picking the right Social Security claiming age for you can result in a meaningful benefit. And we've got an example, a real life case example in the presentation here, where that difference was 111,000 over their lifetime. So the numbers we're talking about are very big, and choosing the wrong time to turn on Social Security can have a huge impact on your retirement. The rules are extremely complicated. I'm going to go through all of those rules tonight. Just for one example, depending on when you turn on your Social Security, you can get as little as 70% of your expected benefit, or as much as 132% of your expected benefit. So that's a pretty broad range of how much you're going to get depending on when you turn it on. And in terms of important decisions here, that number 192, if you're a married couple, that's the approximate number of claiming choices you have. Because as we're going to talk about, you can turn it on anywhere between 62 and 70. And any month in between. And if you're a married couple, they can do the same thing. So you end up with about 192 claiming options. So it's a big number that we're talking about in terms of a benefit. The rules are extremely complicated. You've got a lot of choices. And kind of the final one here, and probably the most important, is 365. So once you decide to turn on your Social Security benefit, you have 365 days to change your mind. And if you don't change your mind within that 1 year period, now you're stuck with your decision for the rest of your life. And if you're married, it also impacts your spouse and the rest of their lives. So this is a decision you need to get right. And you've got to do it up front. And you've got a lot of choices. And so we're going to kind of walk through, these decisions that you need to make and what maybe are the best options for you in terms of making them. So we're going to use Bob and Joan as our case study tonight. So Bob and Joan are age 66. Bob receives about $2,500 per month in benefits. Joan receives $1,250. So they're getting $3,750 a month in combined Social Security benefits. That's about $45,000 a year. So this is a very typical Social Security client. And so we're going to talk about how some of these decisions impact their benefits and some of the choices you're going to make. So to start with, what you need to know about Social Security, A, it's guaranteed by the U.S. government. So there's probably no safer investment or income stream in the U.S. Because they're not going to stop making their government paychecks. And you've heard things about like the Social Security Trust Fund and all of that. The reality is if that ever runs out, the government can just print more money and they're going to continue to make your Social Security benefits. They're also payable for life. And so you can't outlive your Social Security benefit. So you don't have to worry about, living to age 100 and running out of at least your Social Security benefit. If you're married, then those benefits can continue for both your life. They also have cost of living raises, and we'll talk about. They haven't been very large over the last few years because we haven't had inflation. But when there is inflation, your Social Security benefits keep pace. And then, as I mentioned, there's these multiple options. You can turn on your benefits anywhere between 62 and 70, and your spouse can do the same thing if you're married. So you've got a bunch of choices as to when you turn on that benefit. But you've got some important features here. It's guaranteed by the government, it's payable for life, and you have a cost of living raise. So if we were to think of Bob and Joan's Social Security as just another asset of theirs, say it was an IRA or a 401k or something like that, how much would Bob and Joan need to have sitting in that account to give them $45,000 per year for their lives with cost of living raises? Is that number, would you need $500,000? Would you need $750,000? Would you need $1 million to generate $45,000 per year for 2 lives with cost of living? One way to kind of look at that is to use something called the 4% rule. And maybe you've heard of this, and it's been around now for a few decades. But essentially what this rule is it's trying to determine if you take your typical 65-year-old retired couple and they're in your typical balanced portfolio, 60% in stocks, 40% in bonds, how much could they take out every single year from that portfolio and have a very high probability of not running out of money? And so that number came out to about 4% in the original studies. And that if you stick to around 4%, you've got a pretty high probability of success, not running out of money, assuming you start with 4% and you give yourself a cost of living increase every single year. So if we apply that 4% rule to Bob and Joan's $45,000 per year, what they would need to have in a retirement plan or a 401k would be about $1.1 million. So you can see that Social Security benefit is a significant benefit. It very, very well may be the largest benefit that Bob and Joan have. And so that's, we've got to take this $1.1 million benefit and be smart about it and do whatever we can to maximize those benefits. So that's kind of the framework. We look at Social Security benefits as one of your assets in your retirement income plan. And we want to do whatever we can to maximize that, which the ultimate goal is to just increase your probability of success of not running out of money in retirement and achieving all your financial goals. So Social Security is an important benefit. It's, one way we look at retirement is you have this kind of 3-legged stool. And so you have guaranteed income. And so in the past, what that guaranteed income leg was from pensions. And maybe some of you are fortunate enough to have a pension. Either you've worked at a large company for a long period of time, or you work in a union, or you're a teacher or something like that. And so you still have a pension. So you're going to have that source of guaranteed income coming in. In addition, you'll have Social Security, which is guaranteed income. And then you may or may not have annuities that provide lifetime income, things like that. So that's the guaranteed income leg, and that's your base. You know that's going to come in every single year. And so then whatever that's not covering in terms of your expenses has got to come from these other two buckets here. And probably your other big bucket is your retirement savings. Whether you have money in a 401k or an IRA or a Roth IRA or 401k, or you have money in a brokerage account, that's typically going to be the other place you're going to supplement your shortfalls on top of your guaranteed income. And then you may have other assets that we can work with, like you may have a business that we could sell or turn into an income. You may have rental properties, and we have rental income we can rely on. A lot of people these days, when they retire, we kind of look at it as work optional. It's not like all of a sudden you're going to just quit working at age 65. And that made a lot of sense when, in the past when, say, our parents or grandparents retired, because at 65, they only had a few years left to live. Nowadays, if you retire at 65, you may have another 30 years. And so people aren't really ready to hang it up. So they may go into an encore career and may do something totally different. Or they may, do a consulting or start a sideline gig or a business or something. An example I like to use is I have a nurse who worked with children at a children's hospital. And when she came to work with me, it was stressful work, and it was tough to see sick kids all the time. So she said, Jim, I want to keep working, but I just don't want to do this anymore. What she really wanted to do was to go work at a nursery and, sell plants and talk to people about landscaping and plants all day. And so we designed a plan where she went and did that. And is she making a ton of money at it? No, but it is bringing in enough money to supplement her other sources, and it gives her some purpose during retirement. And so a lot of people will work now, and we'll factor that into the retirement income plan. And then finally, home equity. I mean, a lot of people in Southern California have a lot of home equity, and there are strategies you can use to create retirement income, whether that's selling the house and trading down, or using a reverse mortgage, or a home equity line of credit, whatever it is. We look at all of these to come up with that optimal plan for making sure you don't run out of money during retirement. But that starting point is typically going to be your Social Security benefit. And so that's the three-legged stool. Another way we look at retirement is I like to kind of analogize as climbing a mountain. And so there's two phases in your life in this journey up the mountain. The first is accumulation. So you're still working. You've got a date in mind where you think maybe you want to hang it up. So you're climbing up this mountain and you're accumulating. And then at some point you're going to reach the top of that mountain, that retirement age or date. And now you've got to come down the mountain to get back to the start. And that's the distribution phase. They work totally different. The focus is totally different. And the strategies we use are totally different. And they're both important. So when you're accumulating, our focus in providing financial advice is on growing that nest egg, making sure we accumulate enough money so that we can meet all your retirement goals in the future. So our job there is to just kind of guide you and keep you on the path. Just keep nudging you up the hill. Hey, put the money in your 401k. Let's make sure we have proper asset allocation. Let's make sure that we don't make any rash decisions if the market's going sideways, things like that. So it's just slow and steady. We're nudging you up. We're guiding you along that path. We're making sure you have proper asset allocation, et cetera. So our job during accumulation is fairly straightforward. But ultimately, we're going to reach the top of that mountain. And that'll be whatever age, your individual situation decides that you want to retire. And again, it may not be full retirement, it may be partial retirement, encore career, et cetera. But you're going to reach the top of that mountain at some point. And so then, you're going to take a little breather and, hey, I made it. And I'm a big outdoors guy, as is Blake. And so this is a picture of Mount Whitney. And I don't know if any of you have climbed Mount Whitney in the past. If you have, you can raise your hand. So Mount Whitney's claim to fame is in the continental United States. So outside of Alaska, it is the highest mountain in the lower 48. Hey, we had a couple people raise their hand, so great. So, you see the picture there, and from the front there, it looks pretty imposing. And, it's almost 14,500 feet high, so the air is thin. This picture here was taken in September a couple years ago. You can see there was already snow on the ground, but the reality is it's a trail, not an easy trail. It's 22 miles round trip, and the air is thin, and the trail's kind of slippery. So it's one of those bucket list things people like to do. And this is a picture of myself and my son Brandon. We did it a couple years ago. I've done it 3 or 4 times, but I was fortunate enough to be able to do it with my son a couple years ago. So you made it to the top of the peak. Well, that's only half the journey. On Mount Whitney, you went up 11 miles, but now you got 11 miles to go to come down. And, when you're climbing a mountain, going up is only half the journey. And this picture is from Mount Everest. And Mount Everest is twice as high as Mount Whitney. It's 29,000 feet high. And it actually, I just read something today that it actually grew another 2 feet. So now it's 29,031 feet. But, again, going up the mountain is the easier part of the journey. In fact, by most estimates, 80% of all climbing injuries and deaths happen on the way down. And, there's a variety of reasons for that. One is, again, something like Mount Everest, you've trained for months, you put all this energy into it, the air is thin, you can't even, be up there without oxygen. So you get to the top and you've used up all your adrenaline. And, you take a quick breather, but you got to come down, and maybe a storm comes in, or maybe you get low on oxygen or run out of oxygen, or you slip and fall. I mean, there's a bunch of risks associated with coming down that mountain. And it's the same for retirement. When you get into the distribution phase, that's the more financially risky phase of life. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. So when you finally reach the top of that mountain and now you're going to go into distribution, our focus has gone from helping you accumulate to helping you distribute your assets the most efficient way and to preserve them. And there's a bunch of risk you face as you start coming down that mountain. First is taxes. People don't think that, taxes are as big an issue in retirement. Most people have probably heard their whole lives is like, hey, once I get to retirement, I'm in a lower tax bracket. Not necessarily the case. We're going to talk about your tax risk in a few minutes, and Blake's going to talk a little bit later in the presentation about using tax diversification to minimize that tax hit. The next one's inflation. When we're talking, a 30-year retirement, inflation's going to come back at some point. And, right now we haven't had to worry about it, but at some point we're going to have to. Probably the biggest is longevity. I mean, you knew kind of how long the trail up was, but you have no idea how long the trail down is. You don't know if you're going to live to, for another 5 years, for another 10 years, for another 30 years. And so that's the big unknown is, we don't know how long we have to make this money last. So we can make some safe assumptions, and we can model for a bunch of what ifs, but we don't know that. The other big what if in retirement is your health. You don't know if, you're going to have a major health event, like, a heart attack or cancer, or if you're going to have dementia or Alzheimer's. Those all impact your retirement. And then finally, you have no idea what the stock market's going to do and, what your investments are going to look like. So I'm going to talk just briefly about these 5 risks, and then I'll tie it all into how Social Security can kind of help minimize some of these risks. So let's start with tax. And some of you may have attended our tax webinar a couple weeks ago, so I apologize if a couple of these slides are going to be the same. But let me just see a show of hands. How many of you think the taxes are going to be going up in the next year or so? 4 people, okay. How many of you think taxes are going to go down? Okay. But we've got a mix. How many think they're going to just stay the same? All right, so we got a bunch of differing opinions here. My answer is yes. They're going to do all of these things. I have absolutely no idea any more than you do about what taxes are going to do over a 25 or 30-year period. What I do know is that tax rates change about every 4 to 5 years. In fact, in the last 3 years, we've had 3 pieces of tax legislation. We had the SECURI Act, we had the CARES Act, we had the stimulus package that was just passed. So we have changes constantly. We now have a new president, and we have a divided Congress. And so will tax rates change? Yeah, probably in the next couple of years, there'll be adjustments. Also, the last major tax act that was at the end of 2017 is scheduled to sunset at the end of 2025. So we know taxes are going to change constantly. Let me just give you an example of where tax rates can be. So here's the years 1950 to 1986. You can see the highest tax rate we've had since we implemented income taxes was at 92%. You can see for pretty much all the way until the Reagan years, tax rates hovered in the between 90 and 70%, and then they dropped in 82 to 86 to 50%. So you can see tax rates are nowhere near where they historically have been. In fact, over the last several years, we've been as low as 28, and we've been hovering in the 30s now for the past couple of decades. We're currently at 37%. So if we're looking at a historical perspective, we're on the low end of the scale in terms of taxes. So what that means is we can't just assume we're going to be in a lower tax bracket in the future. Tax rates are going to change on us constantly, and those rates of change have accelerated. So we've got to incorporate tax planning and tax diversification into our retirement income planning. It's one of the reasons we focus so heavily on taxes, and we incorporate tax planning and preparation into our planning, is because it's going to be a big part of your retirement planning. Okay, so then the next one is inflation. And I kind of titled this one Forgotten But Not Gone. And so here's inflation over the last 50 years. And you can see for 2020, it was at 1.4%. It's as low as it's been. And I know many of you on this webinar are baby boomers as well. And you probably can remember a 13% inflation rate. I know I bought my first home in 1982, and I remember my mortgage being 12.5%. But at the same time, I was getting 18% of my money market account. So people that are our kids' age, et cetera, have no idea about inflation. But it's something we have to test for. Now, a lot of financial advisors will say, okay, well, the historical inflation rate is 3.5%, so I'm going to show your spending go up at 3.5% every single year. That's not realistic either, because yes, the cost of goods will go up during retirement, but your spending also will also slow down and actually decline. So we need to factor spending increases in your retirement income plan, but we don't necessarily have to stick to a strict pattern of we're going to show your spending go up every single year. So just to kind of give you an example of inflation, how many of you remember this movie? It was the big hit in 1969 into 70. So yeah, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. So what was the cost to see that movie? On average, it was $1.20. I kind of remember being able to go to the movie theater around that time when I was, going into my teens and paying 50 cents and seeing 2 movies. But according to the research I did, the average cost was $1.20. Well, if we look at the big movie from, I guess, last year, because we really haven't had any movies for a year or so, Avengers, the average cost to see that movie was $9.16. And I don't even want to think about what the cost of a bucket of popcorn is these days compared to what it was back when we were all kids. But that's an example of inflation. So we have to build that into your spending plan. And we also have to stress test for what happens if we have a large period of inflation again. And there are things we can do to work around that. And Blake will talk about that towards the end of the presentation. So the next one's longevity. As I mentioned, this is the big unknown. You have no idea how long you're going to live. So the numbers I have are under 2020. This is the number of people that are age 100 last year. And ladies, look at that number, 72,049. So that's the number of females that are age 100 versus the number of males that were age 100, only 18,000. It's almost a 4-to-1 difference. Females to males in terms of longevity. But last year we had 90,000 people that are age 100. If you think about the 300 plus million people that live in the United States, not that big of a number really. But let's fast forward to 2054 when a lot of us will be in that nearing that age 100 range. Now we're talking 600,000 people will be age 100. So is everybody going to live to age 100? No. And we don't automatically assume that people are going to live to age 100. We have a very detailed discussion when we go through our discovery process with our clients about, how's your individual health and what's your family health history look like and how long did your parents live and grandparents and all that. And we obviously want to be conservative, but I don't want to assume that everybody's going to live out to age 100 because if I'm doing that, then you've got to preserve more of your money and you don't get to live the retirement you want. So we're going to make some reasonable and conservative assumptions about longevity, but we're not automatically going to assume everybody's going to live to age 100. Now, do we stress test to see what happens to your plan if you live to 100? Absolutely. But that's not the assumption we're going to make going in. But we are going to assume probably longevity into your early to mid 90s for most people, unless you tell us, hey, I've got some health history that is going to shorten my life expectancy. Next is healthcare. And so I've got numbers from Fidelity, the investment company, and the custodian that we use for our investment clients. Every year they do a study about a typical 65-year-old couple, how much are they going to spend on healthcare during retirement? And that number for last year was $280,000. And so that's a pretty scary number. And I personally think that number is on the high side. What I see for a lot of my clients is when they actually retire and go into Medicare, they see their healthcare costs go down. So as long as you're not subject to the highest Medicare premium and you buy a good solid Medicare supplement, your costs will probably be less. Because that number, that $280,000, does not include having to go into a nursing home or having home health care or anything like that. That's the next number down there. So if you have to have home health care or going to a nursing home, in Southern California, the average cost for a nursing home is about $7,600 a month, and the average stay is 3 years. So again, another thing we have to stress test to see what happens if one or both of you have to go into a nursing home for a couple of years. What does that do to your plan? The other thing with healthcare is a lot of you may not want to wait until 65 to retire. You may want to retire at 62 or 60, or one of you retires early and the other one keeps working or whatever. So Medicare does not kick in until age 65. So how do we bridge that gap? And so we have to look at, okay, can we use COBRA from, your former employer for 18 months? Do you need to go on to Covered California? Do you have retiree health care? We have to help you figure out how you bridge that gap if you're going to retire prior to age 65. So obviously we've got to factor healthcare risks and have an evaluation of those risks for you in your plan, and we stress test for healthcare events. But the biggie for people that are near retirement is market volatility. And so we have what we call the retirement red zone, which is, we kind of define it as the 5 years prior to retirement and then the 5 years immediately into retirement. So there's a 10-year period where you have to be very prudent with your money. And we want to make sure that we don't have large losses right at the start of retirement, because we see that that decimates a retirement plan faster than anything else. And I'm going to give you a couple examples here. So back to Bob and Joan, they have $1 million nest egg, and they're going to pull $50,000 a year out each year with inflation increases. So we're going to start at $50,000. We'll increase it every year by whatever inflation is. You've got your typical 60-40 balanced portfolio. And so what would this look like if they retired in 1980, 1990, and 2000? So 3 different decades. What do they have left at the end of the first decade in retirement? Again, starting with $1 million, they're pulling 5% per year out with inflation increases. What do they have left at the end of that 10-year period? You can see if Bob and Joan retired in 1980, at the end of the decade, not only have they not depleted their portfolio, it's actually grown from 1 million to 1.7, even pulling out $50,000 plus per year. If Bob and Joan retired in 1990 instead of 1980, they've done even better. They've got 130,000 more. But if Bob and Joan retired in the year 2000, they didn't make it out of the decade. They're $470,000 in the hole by the end of that decade. So when you retire has a huge impact, and we've got to mitigate those risks. And I'm showing you market volatility in this slide. The same thing can happen if we retire at the wrong time in terms of inflation. But why are those results so different? It's what we call sequence of return risk. So if we're now starting to distribute your nest egg and the market's going down, you get into the spiral. We have to take more and more and more, and ultimately you run out of money. On the other hand, if you're retired and the market's going up, like the slide on the left here, the nest egg keeps growing and it doesn't deplete. And so this 20-year period here, 80 to 99, the worst return during that entire 20-year period was a negative 9.73. And it was right here. And I started the business in 1986, right before the big crash in 1987. Some of you probably remember it. It was a 503-point drop in one day. It's still the biggest one-day drop. But the market recovered pretty quickly. You can see it dropped, and then it took off like a rocket ship. And, you know, it looks like a roller coaster at Magic Mountain. So that's why when Bob and Joan retired during that time period, they almost doubled their money, even though they were pulling $50,000 per year out. But Bob and Joan retired in 2000. We had the tech crash of 2000 2002. So then they finally get back to where they started, and then we have the Great Recession of 2008 2009. So the worst return during that period was a negative 38.49. Now, a lot of people think, okay, well, if I'm down 38, if the market comes back 38, I'm back to even. No, because if you start with $100 and you lose 38%, you're at $62. And so if you get 38% at $62, that's not bringing you back to where you started. You actually need to return 62% to break even. And so what happened in Bob and Joan's situation here is it took them 13 years to get back to their original value. And so if we're pulling money out during this period of time, that's how you end up running out of money within the less than 10 years into retirement. So sequence of return risk is a huge risk for you. And it's one that we focus heavily on when we're working with you in retirement income planning. So how do we navigate that? What we want to do is to minimize sequence of return risk as much as possible. And so what we probably will do is have a reduced risk, what we call glide path. And you probably are familiar with this. The idea is as you get older, you get more conservative, right? It used to be you'd go from all stocks to all bonds. Well, we know now that that's not a good strategy. You have to have equities all through retirement for inflation protection and growth, et cetera. But what we will do is during that period of time where we know you're going to be entering retirement, we're going to be more conservative. And our focus at that point is creating the cash flow that you need in the safest manner possible. And that's where Social Security planning can come in, is we may turn on your Social Security earlier because we know that's guaranteed and not subject to sequence of return risk. But for that 10-year period in the retirement red zone, our focus is more on return of your investment than return on your investment. And so we use our frugal investor philosophy, which is to use dividend-paying stocks to provide some steady dividend income. And, ideally, these aren't the most volatile stocks. And we make sure that whatever you need for your income shortfalls is not invested in the market, because we want to minimize that sequence of return risk as much as possible. Okay, so those are the big retirement risks. So then how does Social Security help you navigate those risks? And so one way is it provides a source of guaranteed income. I just talked about, it's guaranteed income. You know exactly what your Social Security benefit's going to be. It doesn't fluctuate. It doesn't go up and down. And so that can provide the base or floor income level that we don't have to worry about being subjected to market risk. It's also guaranteed for life. So you live to 100, you live to 110, that's okay. You'll keep getting your Social Security checks. And they have cost of living adjustments. So last year, people that are on Social Security, the raise for this year is only a 1.3% increase because it's tied to inflation. But if inflation goes back to, where it's 6, 7, 13%, Social Security checks will go up by about the same amount. So it provides inflation protection. So it's providing that guaranteed income that's not subject to sequence of return risk. You can't outlive it. You get cost of living adjustments. And you also get some, though not huge, tax benefits. So it helps from a tax standpoint as well. So how does Social Security work? Honestly, it's just a giant Ponzi scheme where you've got the workers at the bottom paying in, and then the people at the top are collecting the benefits. So it's a pyramid. And it worked great for many years because if you look at the numbers when Social Security started, that number 60, that was the average life expectancy. So Social Security benefits weren't payable until 65. So most of the people, by the time Social Security got around, they were deceased and they didn't collect. So we had 160 workers paying in for every one retired worker collecting benefits. So the pyramid worked great. The problem is people are living longer. And so now life expectancy is 79. And so, with 66, age 66 for retirement age, people are going to collect benefits for 13 years or more. And now we only have 3 workers paying in for every one worker collecting because our population is aged. And so that's where you hear things like, Social Security is going to run out of money because the pyramid's going to collapse. And based on current projections, the trust fund is supposed to run out of money in 2034. That's why you may see changes for our kids and grandkids where they have to take it later. And maybe it's means tested, things like that. But they're not going to change your benefits because it doesn't matter whether the trust fund has money in it or not, they can just print money and they'll continue to make your Social Security benefits. But that's the way the Social Security program works, is the people paying in are providing the benefits for the people that are retired. And unfortunately, the pyramids become out of balance. And they'll have to figure out ways to get more in balance, which probably means raising the claiming age up to 70 or 72 or something like that in the future. So how do you get Social Security benefits? To be eligible for Social Security benefits, you have to work a total of at least 10 years. So it's 40 quarters. So it doesn't have to be 10 consecutive years. Just over your lifetime, you had to have worked, the equivalent of 10 years, 40 quarters. The minimum age you can collect Social Security retirement benefits is 62. So it doesn't matter. You've already got your 40 quarters. You can't turn on Social Security until at least 62. you had to pay it into the Social Security system. So you had to have contributed into the system to be able to collect benefits. And again, a lot of people, they'll kind of make the argument, hey, I paid in my whole life, I'm entitled to the benefits. But you paid in your whole life to pay for your parents and grandparents' benefits, not for your own benefits. It's your kids that are going to pay into the system to pay for your benefits. And the new full retirement age, or the age when you're supposed to turn your benefits, was changed back in 1993 from 65 to 66 to 67, depends on the month you were born. But Medicare had stayed at 65. And so they've been decoupled. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. It's like, you can turn on Medicare at 65, you can turn on Social Security anywhere between 62 and 70, as we're going to talk about. So how are your benefits determined? So they have this formula, and they come up with what they call your average index monthly earnings. So they take your 35 best income years, and they average those, and they adjust them for inflation. So, when I started working in 1975, I worked at a Texaco making $2.10 an hour. They bring that up to today's value in terms of determining that money. So they bring it to an equivalent value. But they take your 35 best years. So if you've looked at your Social Security statement, it shows your earnings history every single year you worked. And so they're going to take your 35 best years. They come up with this average index monthly earnings, and then they translate that into kind of the amount of benefit you're entitled to. And they translate that to a monthly amount called your primary insurance amount. And then the amount you're going to get is adjusted upwards or downwards based on when you take your benefits. So the first thing you do is they come up with your primary insurance amount. That's the monthly benefit they've calculated that you're entitled to if you take your benefits at full retirement age. So it's ages 66 to 67, depending on the month you were born. And so the way they determine that is they've taken your 35 best years, and they've come up with kind of your pot of money. This is the amount of money we're going to pay you over your lifetime. And then they calculate that to a monthly benefit. And so when you look at your Social Security statement, it shows on there at full retirement age, you'll receive X amount of money. The maximum right now is like $2,900 a month. So that's if you take it when you're supposed to. But you can take it earlier and you can take it later, and it's adjusted up or down. And that's what I'm going to talk about now. So you can take it as early as 62. And if you do that, they're not going to pay you more money. They're going to pay you the exact same amount of money. They're just going to stretch those benefits out over a longer period of time. So that reduces your payment. And again, depends on whether your full retirement age is 66 or 67, you can have either a 4-year reduction or a 5-year reduction. And so anywhere between 25 and 30%, depending on your full retirement age, your benefits reduced. And it makes a ton of sense. The way I like to look at this is your 30-year mortgage. So if they know this is the amount of money we're going to pay you, and they calculated that monthly benefit based on a life expectancy, of 66. But now you're going to take it 4 years earlier. They're not paying you more. They're just going to spread that payment out over a longer period of time. So it's like if you've got a 30-year mortgage, you're going to pay the same amount back, but you're paying it over a longer period of time. Therefore, your payment's less. On the other hand, you can delay it as late as age 70, and for every year you delay beyond your full retirement age, you get an 8% increase in benefits. So again, 66, you got a 32% increase, 67, you got a 24% increase, and this is like the 15-year mortgage. They're not paying you more, they're just paying it over a shorter period of time. And so you're taking it 3 to 4 years later, so that means your payment's bigger because they're paying you the same amount just over a shorter period of time. So it actually, there's some logic to what they're doing. And depending on when you take it, your benefit could be as low as 70% of what you're supposed to get and as high as 132% of what you're supposed to get. I'll give you an example. So Bob's full retirement age PIA was $2,500. So if Bob turns it on at 62, he's taken a 25% reduction in benefits, and so he's only going to get $1,875 a month. Now he's going to get the benefits for 4 more years. So in theory, he should end up with the same amount of money, but that $1,875 is a permanent reduction. It won't increase other than cost of living. On the other hand, Bob can wait until 70, and now his benefit is 32% higher, and so he would get $3,300. So you can see these are just 3 claiming ages. At 62, it's $1,875. At 66, $2,500. At age 70, it's $3,300. So which one of those makes the most sense? All depends on your individual situation and life expectancy and a bunch of other factors. And this is one of the things we have to do is kind of analyze that for you to figure out the optimal claiming age. Again, you can do 63, you can do 63 and a half, you can do 67 and a half, anywhere in there, and you'll be adjusted upward or downward depending on how far off you are from your full retirement age. So now let's talk about spousal benefits. So if you're a married couple, you're both entitled to Social Security benefits. And the way it works is spouse is entitled to the greater of their own benefit or half of the other spouses, whichever is the bigger number. And so for our case study, Joan worked. She maybe took some time off to raise a family, etc. So her own benefit is $900. Well, half of Bob's $2,500 would be $1,250. So Joan would get the $1,250 benefit. So Joan's going to get the higher of those two. In this case, she would get the $1,250. Now, if Joan takes it early, the benefits reduction still applies. They're going to do the same thing. They're not going to pay you more. They're going to reduce your benefit. But one recent change over the last few years is now if Joan's going to receive a spousal benefit, she can't turn on the spousal benefit until Bob turns his benefit on. So that's a change. We used to be able to kind of play some games and turn on one benefit and not the other, but you can't do that anymore. So that's a spousal benefit. So Bob's getting $2,500. Joan gets half of Bob's. That's $1,250. That's how they get the $3,750 combined benefit. Okay, now what about survivor benefits? What happens when one of them passes away? So here's an exception to the general rule that you can't take benefits prior to 62. If you're in a widower situation, you can actually turn on your benefits at age 60. Now, you still get the reduction. They're never going to pay you more. So now you're looking at maybe a 6 or 7 year extra payment time frame. So your benefits are even further reduced. And the way the survivor benefit works is the survivor is going to get the greater of their own or the deceased spouse's benefit. And I'll give you an example here in a second. So what's really important to note in that is that one of the benefits is going to drop off. You don't get both anymore. You're only going to get one of them. You'll get the higher of the two. And there's a strategy we can use, and I've used this, is where you can start with a survivor benefit and then switch to your own later and take advantage of that age 70 delayed credit. So let's say Bob passes away at 72 years old. So their combined benefits, $3,750. Bob's getting $2,500, Joan's getting $1,250. So when Bob dies, Joan's is going to drop off because it's a smaller benefit, and she steps into Bob's shoes, and she gets that $2,500. So that's a 33% reduction in income. And what we need to kind of look at when we're doing the analysis is, what does that do to Joan's financial situation? Is she going to have enough money? And what impact does that have? Maybe they're still okay. Maybe they have some life insurance that will kind of offset that. Maybe they're lost my train of thought there. Maybe they have pension income or other assets, but we've got to calculate, is Joan going to have enough? This is one of those situations where had Bob delayed and was getting the $3,300 benefit instead of the $2,500. When he passed away, Joan could have stepped into those shoes and gotten the $3,300 benefit. So survivor benefits is one of those situations where delaying may play an important role. Because if a 33% reduction in income is going to cause problems for Joan, but if it was $3,300 instead of $2,500, maybe that's enough to tide her over. And so this is one of those situations where we need to look at, is delaying going to provide a benefit to that survivor? So the next situation is, what happens if Bob and Joan got divorced? How does that work in terms of Social Security benefits? So a divorced spouse benefit is available. So it essentially works like a spousal benefit. If they were married for 10 years and the divorced spouse remains unmarried, then for example, if Bob and Joan got divorced, Joan could continue to take that spousal benefit, half of Bob's, if that's higher than her own, as long as they were married for 10 years and Joan didn't remarry. If Joan remarried, then they go back to, okay, what does the new spouse's benefit look like versus Joan's own benefit? But you can take that spousal benefit, and there's one of the things we'll look at. If you're divorced and you meet the rules, it's okay, what was your ex-spouse's or Social Security benefit look like? Is that higher than your own? Then we want to take advantage of that. Some additional rules to note. Remarriage ends a divorced spouse's benefit. So if Joan's taking divorced spouse benefits and she remarries, as I mentioned, then you're going to step into the shoes of your new spouse, or you're going to get your own benefit. And multiple ex-spouses can receive benefits. And so the poster child for this situation is old Johnny here. I'm sure you all remember Johnny Carson. So at one point, Johnny had a current spouse and 2 ex-wives all receiving Social Security benefits on his record. So he was, I always get this backwards. I think he was still married to Alexis. So Alexis was receiving her typical spousal benefit. But he had been married to Joan and Joanna for both over the 10 years. They hadn't remarried. So they were both receiving spousal benefits off of Johnny's record as well. So Johnny's getting his own benefit. Joan, Joanna, and Alexis are all getting spousal benefits. So the government lost money on Johnny. And so we have 4 people that are receiving benefits based on Johnny's record. So that's divorces. You're eligible if you were married for 10 years and you remain unmarried. We can look at whether a divorced spouse benefit is better than your own. Okay, so now let's talk about some of the gotchas with Social Security. And there's a few, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about some of these. So I think a lot of people don't realize that Social Security benefits are taxable. So you get to pay tax on your Social Security benefits, and there's some breaks. We'll talk about them. Also, if you claim early, prior to full retirement age, and you keep working, if you make too much money, they're going to take some of your benefits away. I'll give you an example of that. And then finally, if you've worked outside of Social Security at some point, you're a teacher or something like that, there's provisions where if you're getting a pension and you work outside of Social Security, your benefits are reduced. The windfall elimination provision applies to your own retirement benefit. The government pension offset applies to a survivor benefit. So if you worked outside of Social Security for any period of time and you've got a pension, like from CalSTRS or CalPERS or whatever, this could impact your Social Security, and it's something we'd have to analyze and factor into your equation. So Social Security and taxes. So the general rule is up to 85% of your Social Security benefit will be taxable. If at the single level you make more than $34,000, and at the married level it's more than $44,000. Only half is taxed if you're at the lesser threshold, 25 and 32. But for most people, these are pretty low thresholds, and so you're probably going to pay tax on 85% of your Social Security benefit. We do still do tax projections because one thing to consider is, let's say you're a single individual and you made $24,999. You don't pay tax on Social Security. Now, if you make $25,001, all of a sudden half of all your Social Security is taxable. So we always want to make sure we're not creating a situation where all of a sudden we've made some of your Social Security benefits either taxable or more taxable. The good news is in terms of California state tax, you don't have to pay tax on your Social Security benefits. So it's like one of the very few tax breaks California gives us. So the bottom line is you probably are going to pay tax on some of your Social Security. You do have some tax benefits, particularly at the state level. And so again, maybe we can do some tax planning around Social Security benefits. This next one is working and collecting benefits early. So, let's say you want to turn on your Social Security early, A, because you don't think that you are going to live all that long, or B, because you're worried that Social Security is not going to be around. So if you do that and you continue to work, they're going to take away $1 of your benefits for every $2 you earn above roughly $19,000. Now, once you hit full retirement age, you can work and make as much as you want. This only applies prior to full retirement age. So let me give you an example. So, Bob's getting $2,500 a month at age 65. So Bob's under full retirement age at this point, and he earns $50,000 doing some consulting gig. So he's above that threshold. So his benefit is going to be reduced by $15,520. So he's no longer going to get $30,000. He's only going to get $14,480. So it's something we again need to evaluate. If you're going to take it early and you're going to keep working, we just have to take into account, does that make sense to turn it on? Not only are you getting the reduction in benefits, from claiming it early, now you potentially have the reduction in benefits because you continue to work. And so we have to plan around that one. So really kind of the bottom line here is, how do you get the most from Social Security? What can we do so that your Social Security benefits end up being maximized? One of the ways we can look at this is a Social Security maximization analysis. It's kind of a break-even analysis. So how long do you need to live for delaying taking those benefits to be worth it? And I'll give you just kind of a brief example here. So we've got three scenarios. The green line is taking it early at 62. The blue line is taking it when you were supposed to at 66. And the red line is you're going to delay till age 70. And you can see the crossover point where delaying gets you more money is roughly between 78 and 80 years old. And if we look at probably a more realistic life expectancy is say 85, 86, the difference between delaying it, where you would ultimately receive $673,000 over that period of time, versus taking it early, where you got 4 more payments, but they're lower payments, is only $585. So there's almost a $90,000 difference at age 86 between taking it later and taking it early. Obviously, if you're going to die earlier, then taking it earlier makes the most sense. Unless we know that there's a pretty good likelihood you're going to die prematurely, it might make sense to delay your benefits. Now let's look at a married couple example. And so here, you've got 2 people who can decide when to turn it on. And so the first one here, the green line, is they're both going to take it early. They're both going to turn on their benefits early. The blue line is they're both going to delay. And then this red one, which is a common strategy we'll use, is one will turn it on early and one will turn it on late. And you can see, again, if we go out to about age 86, there's about $100,000 difference between taking it early and using the optimal scenario. So this is the kind of analysis we do when we're working with our retiree clients, is kind of maximize, when they should turn on that Social Security benefit to get them the most money. But it all really boils down to that probability of success. What's going to get you the highest probability of not running out of money? But you can see right there, those were 2 real-life examples where in both those situations, there was about $100,000 difference between turning it on early and turning it on late, assuming you live to a fairly reasonable life expectancy of 85, 86 years old. So in terms of getting ready to turn on Social Security, what everybody should do is to go to ssa.gov and to pull your copy of your Social Security benefit statement. And on there, it'll show you what your estimated benefit is at full retirement age, at age 62, and age 70. The one caveat there is they'll assume you're going to keep making what you're making today all the way up to that full retirement age. So those assumptions could be wrong. If you're going to retire at 62, then the numbers are going to be on the high side. You should talk to us about doing a Social Security maximization analysis and figuring out what the optimal situation is. And then also, again, I mentioned Medicare is now at 65, where Social Security could be anytime between 62 and 70, so it's been decoupled. So you got to evaluate your Medicare supplement plans, and you got to sign up for Medicare at 65 in most situations. So, go on to SSA.gov. They don't mail you statements anymore. Pull your statement, look at it, make sure that there's not some zeros for years where you knew you worked, because, the government never makes mistakes, right? And then, talk to us about doing a Social Security maximization analysis for you. Okay, so that brings us to our final poll before I turn it over to Blake to wrap this up. Let me pull the poll up. Okay. So Blake, you want to go ahead and
Yep.
put the poll here?
Yeah, so this second poll question is going to ask, you might not know the answer to this now, but what type of Social Security benefit do you think you will collect, or are you already collecting? So Jim just highlighted the different types of benefits. So the personal benefit, collecting off of a spouse, divorce, ex-spouse's benefit, a survivor widow's benefit. You might not be sure, as it may be too early to tell at this time, or you might not be eligible if you work for CalPERS or you were a teacher and you didn't pay into it. So we'll give a few more seconds here.
Okay.
Check your answers.
Okay.
Okay, so it looks like the majority of us are going to be claiming our personal retirement benefit. Great. Okay, Jim, if you want to close that out and go to the next slide, please. Okay, so we talked about it continuously throughout this presentation, but our biggest goal and the thing that we want to focus most of our attention on is making sure you don't run out of money. How can we make your money last as long as possible so you don't outlive it? Next slide, please. So really, this is designing a customized plan to help manage the retirement red zone. So mitigating the effects of sequence of return risk, as those 5 years prior to retirement and 5 years after retirement are so crucial, having a concrete plan going into retirement and then in that distribution phase, because one simple decision could create a whole different also with that is coordinating your cash flow. So deciding when you should claim Social Security, early at age 62 or delaying it to age 70. Well, I wish it was a cut and dry answer, but it's simply not. It depends on a lot of factors. It depends on what your income needs, how long are you going to work for, how long do you expect to live. There's a lot of inputs that go into that decision, so you want to be very meticulous and intentional when deciding the time to claim your Social Security. Using bridging strategies. So I'll give you an example here. Say you retire at age 62, but you have a pension kicking in at 65. Maybe it makes sense to bridge that gap with either Social Security income or portfolio income. So you're trying to figure out how can we cover that income need up until our pension kicks in. Bucketing, flooring, and other cash flow approaches. So I'll give you an example of a common bucketing strategy that we help our clients employ. So think of bucketing as dividing your portfolio into 3 different buckets based on your goals. Your short-term goals, your medium goals, and your long-term goals. So if we had a $1 million portfolio, maybe we carve out $100,000 just in cash or short-term instruments, enough that could cover your living expenses for a few years if let's just say that the market plummets and you need to draw from your portfolio. So a bucket strategy is going to have enough of cash and short-term instruments in place to weather the storm of a fluctuating or rather poorly performing market. And then from there also, in addition to having that short-term bucket, we want to make sure that we have a portion of our portfolio in longer-term, more growth-oriented investments like stocks. So it's really kind of deciding the asset mix so we have enough bonds that are more stable and can be used for our living expenses, but also have stocks that will allow us to grow our capital, have a larger nest egg, and reap a larger benefit for our heirs. And then proper tax planning, so tax diversification, I'll go into that next here shortly. Next slide, please.
Yeah.
So tax diversification, we like to think about taxes to be labeled into 3 buckets depending on their treatment. So tax-free bucket would be your Roth IRA. I'll go into that shortly. Your health savings account, so that's the only vehicle out there that gives you a triple tax benefit. Your contributions tax deductible, your earnings go tax deferred. Money that's used for qualified health expenses is tax-free as well. Municipal bonds, if you're in a high tax bracket, maybe you use those within your portfolio because that would be exempt from federal and in most cases state tax if you use a municipal bond from the state that you reside in. And home loans, you're tapping into a HELOC if you run into an emergency as a source of capital that wouldn't be taxable to you because it's a loan. Your tax deferred buckets, so think of your IRA, your 401k, your annuities, your earnings are going to grow tax deferred there. And then your taxable buckets, so your brokerage account, your trust, your estate account. And the key is to not have all of your money in one of these single buckets, but rather a combination of all 3. So often we find most people have their money in their tax deferred bucket, but really you want to, in the accumulation phase, start to spread out your assets into all 3 buckets so you can then leverage them when the time arises in the most tax efficient means possible. So getting into the specific nuances of the different tax treatments, let's start with the retirement plan. So your IRA, your 401k, your 403b, money you put into this is going to lower your taxes. It's pre-tax contributions. Typically, you're automatically going to be enrolled in this within your 401k unless you opt for a Roth. And then earnings are going to grow tax deferred. Because you got that upfront deduction when you contributed to the IRA or the 401k, the IRS is going to come after that money at a later time. So eventually when you take out that money, it's going to be taxable 100% as ordinary income. In addition, when your heirs assume that money, that's going to be fully taxable to them. With the IRA and the 401k, you don't want to tap into that prior to 59.5 where you'll face a 10% early withdrawal penalty. And then as well, because you took that upfront deduction, you'll have required minimum distributions at the age of 72. So let's compare that to the Roth IRA. You're not going to get that pre-tax deduction, and your contributions are going to rather come in the form of after tax. Similar to the IRA though, your money's going to grow tax deferred. And then distributions, because you didn't get that upfront deduction, money is going to come out tax-free. So it's kind of a little distinct from the IRA in that sense. At death, what's great for your heirs is that money that they inherit, if they inherited a Roth IRA, all that money is going to be tax-free to your heirs. Like the IRA, you will face a penalty if you take that out prior to 59.5. Distinct from the IRA though, there's no RMDs and you need to hold the account for at least 5 years to be considered a qualified distribution. Last would be your personal investment, so think of your brokerage or trust account. Similar to the Roth, your after-tax contributions there, so you're not getting a deduction for that. Different from the IRAs though is the money's going to be taxable each year in and out. So your capital gains, your interest, and your dividends will be taxed each year. And then when you take out money, the amount of your gains in excess of the contribution, so your basis, will be taxable to you. So let's just, put this into an example. Say we buy Apple for $100 and then we sell it for $115. $15 would be a capital gain tax. So any excess gains above the amount that we put in. What's great about the personal investment and putting money into this bucket is the ability for your cost basis to be stepped up upon your passing. So let's go back to the Apple stock example. Say it's held in an individual transfer on death TOD account of your spouse. When you pass away, say Apple was worth say $200 when you pass away and you bought it at $100. When you pass away, your spouse is going to be able to inherit Apple at a $200 stepped up cost basis. So if they sell Apple for $300, they're only going to pay capital gain taxes on the difference of $200 and $300, so $100, as opposed to the difference of your original purchase price, which was $100, compared to the value of the account when you sell it. They're liquid personal investment accounts. There's no RMDs, and you can take out the money at any kind. So that's why it's great to have a combination of all three of these. Let's do a simple analysis here. Bob and Joan, they need $80,000 for their lifestyle. $45,000 is going to come from Social Security. So we need to take $35,000 from the portfolio. Let's assume they have $750,000 in their 401k and $250,000 in a Roth. So we're going to look at three scenarios here. For the first, let's just say we take the money solely from the 401k, and we'll see the tax impact from that. So if we take the $35,000 from that fully taxable type of account, the 401k, they're going to owe $7,388 in taxes, and they'll net $72,000, which is not meeting their total income goal of $80,000. So that might not be the best scenario for them to take it solely from the 401k to meet their income needs. So let's look at a different strategy. We mentioned that the Roth IRA is completely tax-free, if you meet that qualifying criteria above the age of 59 and a half and hold it for 5 years. We take it solely from the Roth, they're going to have no taxes due. So, thumbs up, they meet that $80,000 income goal. The problem with that is because Roth is such a tax-efficient vehicle, we want to save that as much as possible and allow that to extend throughout our life. So we don't want to go ahead and deplete all of that Roth early on, especially in the first years of our retirement. So let's look at the final scenario where we're doing a combination, or rather a mix of our two different IRA type accounts. So in this last scenario, a better strategy would be, let's take $17,500 from the 401k, the other half from the Roth. So we're not tapping too much of the Roth, and we're grabbing some of the 401k. The end result is we're paying a minimal $1,350 tax, and we're getting just about near that $80,000 income goal. So that's why it kind of all revolves around that spectrum of having multiple tax accounts and utilizing all three buckets. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's put this all together. The key focal points here were to start preparing well before your retirement. We mentioned all those risks before. We don't want to start thinking about this well into our retirement stage. We want to be diligent and intentional before we have that retirement date, or rather before we reach the top of the mountain. Minimize volatility during the retirement red zone. Jim showed you throughout those examples, sequence of return risk can have a dramatic effect on your portfolio in this first few years of retirement. As much as we can, we want to be diligent with the assets that we put in our portfolio. Maybe if you need the money, that means taking it from your bonds as opposed to your stocks. So we're not selling those stocks at a loss, and we allow them runway, or rather time, to grow over the long term. Tax diversification strategies, so utilizing those three buckets. Maximizing your Social Security benefits. So being real intentional and considering all the numerous factors that go into your Social Security decision and seeing the most optimal outcome based on your personal situation. Plan for those risks that we talked about in retirement, and this all kind of leads into having solid fundamental fiduciary advice from a professional. Take control of your retirement. So there's a few things we can't control, and there's a few things we can control. Jim highlighted this, but we can't control how long you're going to live. Longevity, we can't take anything for granted in life. We saw that in 2020. You never know what's going to happen, so we want to make sure that we have a solid plan and we make safe assumptions that you're going to live long, at least to age 95. Tax changes. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017, the SECURI Act, the CARES Act, the Appropriations Act, they're flying in here left and right, so we want to make sure that we can't plan or control this, but once we do have these tax changes, we want to respond and adequately prepare for the aftermath. Inflation, we can't control this as well. Jim's chart show you inflation's been all across the board historically. What we'd want to do is then position your portfolio with those investments that historically have outperformed inflation, such as stocks. And health events, making sure that we can't control what's going to happen to your health. The best that we can do is prepare for the worst and hope for the best in terms of this. We can control your expenses though by helping you develop a strong fundamental saving and spending plan. As well, we can control tax diversification, so tapping into all those three buckets that we talked about earlier and deciding which one to use for a certain goal or major expense of yours. Minimizing the effects of inflation, so this goes to what I said earlier. It's incorporating stocks that have historically outperformed or have had returns greater than inflation in your portfolio. And then how much risk you take. So taking a deep dive into your tolerance for risk, understanding your time horizon, your ability to take risks, and what does your financial situation look like, and taking all those three inputs and developing a portfolio that considers your risk tolerance and ideally aligned with your financial and life goals, and then making the most informed decisions. So as a reminder, complete your survey. So immediately following this webinar is going to be a survey that pops up on your screen. Take 5 minutes or less to complete. We really appreciate and value your feedback. So be willing to complete that. We'd really appreciate it. Again, it's just going to pop up right after that. Go to the next slide. Jim, if you want to.
Yeah, so I'll wrap this up for us, and I apologize. Now we ran a little long this evening, but we want to make sure we gave you as much information as we could. So I mentioned that for attending this webinar, we're more than happy to meet with you individually, absolutely no charge, no pressure, and answer your questions, because I've seen we've been getting some good questions, and a lot of these would probably be better off, answering via a phone conference or a Zoom or an in-person meeting. And so, why should you come in and talk to us? You spend 80,000 hours, working and building up that nest egg. So, why not spend some time and get some advice on what to do? The Social Security Administration is not going to give you any advice about when to take Social Security. They're really good about helping you sign up and figuring out your benefits, but they're not going to tell you, hey, you should take it at 66 because you're going to keep working, or you should take it at 70 because you've got a spouse that needs the money. But the same, the IRS is going to knock on your door and say, oh, by the way, if you'd taken that money out of both your Roth and your 401k, you would have saved, $7,000 in taxes. They're not going to offer advice. And everybody's retirement income picture is unique. I've been doing this for almost 35 years now, and everybody's situation is different. When to take Social Security, when to turn on your pension, all of that stuff is different. So, what you hear from your neighbor, your brother-in-law, or your coworker, or what you hear from Susie Orman or, Jim Cramer, probably isn't the best solution for you. That's why everything we do is customized to your individual situation. And everything we're doing is advice-based. We don't sell products. We work on a fee basis. We act as a fiduciary. So if we're telling you, yeah, this is best for your situation, it's because it's what's best for you. There's no conflict of interest. So we'd encourage you to come in. We're happy to answer any of your questions. You can bring whatever you want to the meeting. We can review your tax returns, your Social Security statement, your investment statements, whatever you want. Again, we're not going to sell you anything. We're not going to lock the door. We're not going to pressure you. We feel strongly that, if you need help, we'll have a pretty strong value proposition, and we'll gain some valuable clients out of this. So kind of find it to work. So just to kind of wrap up, the number one, that's the number of chances you get a successful retirement. Unfortunately, you know, when you get into that retirement red zone, you don't get a lot of do-overs, you know, because you're running out of money in your 70s or whatever. You probably can't go back to work, or maybe, you know, your health situation dictates that you're not able to work anymore. So you've got to get this right up front. And that's why, you know, working with someone like us, we can get you on the right path and get you to where you want to go. I'm going to leave you with this quote here. This is from actually a tax court judge, but I think it's particularly appropriate, not just for taxes, but for pretty much any financial situation. There are two tax systems in America, one for the informed and one for the uninformed, and they're both legal. So whether that applies to making informed tax decisions about where to pull your money from when you need retirement income, whether that's making the right investment decisions or picking the right age for Social Security, the more informed you are, the better off you're going to be and the greater the chances of success. So with that, I thank you guys for attending this evening. Our contact information is located here, so you can reach out to either Blake or myself, or call us.
Yes. Just one quick thing. So I saw there were some questions.
Right.
I know we ran a little bit over. I'll personally answer those questions. We have your email addresses, so I'll get back to you via email tomorrow with the responses to those questions. Sorry we didn't have time to cover them within the presentation. We thank you so much for being patient with us and waiting, and appreciate you completing the survey after that.
Everybody have a great evening, and like Blake said, if you have questions, don't hesitate to give us a call. We're more than happy to talk to you. Everybody have a great evening. Thanks for sticking around.